Hello, and welcome to Pleasure as a Human Right, a discussion with Evan Sweeney and Rebecca Coakley. My name is Nicole Lamerson, and as a visual description, I'm a white woman with light brown hair wearing a navy blue blazer. And I am going to go over some important Zoom and accessibility information before we start our talk today. On screen, you will see a full Zoom toolbar with different options, including things like captions, ASL, etc. Depending on how big your browser window is, or if you join on your phone, the toolbar might look a little different. You will need to click the button with three dots that says More that will show you the different options. We have simultaneous American Sign Language interpretation available. To view the ASL interpreters, click on the interpretation button that looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen. A small menu will appear. Click American Sign Language to view ASL in a pop-out box that you can move around your screen. We also have closed captions available. To turn captions on, click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to have time towards the end for you to ask questions. To ask or submit a question, please click the button with the two speech bubbles that says Q&A on your screen. Feel free to send questions at any time. And please use the chat to let us know if you have any accessibility issues or concerns. For example, if you cannot see the interpreters, we will be sending links through the chat throughout the webinar, and we will also send out those links via email to you along with the webinar recording once it is ready. This webinar is being recorded, and we will email all attendees the recording once it's live, and we'll post it for you to view on our website and on our YouTube channel. I'm now going to pass it to Monica Mitra, Director of the Lurie Institute, to give our opening remarks.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. On behalf of the Lurie Institute for Disability Policy, I am delighted to welcome you to our 2026 Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellowship keynote lecture and discussion, Pleasure as a Human Right. My name is Monica Mitra, and I'm the director of the Lurie Institute for Disability Policy at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University. I'm also the Nancy Lurie Marks Professor of Disability Policy. As a visual description, I'm a brown woman with black hair wearing a white and black checked blazer. It is a great honor to welcome you to our fourth Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellowship keynote. This series began in 2023 with our inaugural fellow, Lori Bertram Roberts, followed in 2024 with Robin Wilson Beatty, in 2025 with Laura Miller. And today I'm delighted to introduce this year's fellow, Evan Sweeney. Today's program will begin with a brief talk from Evan, followed by a conversation between Evan and Rebecca Coakley. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a few acknowledgements and introductions. First, we're deeply grateful to the Ford Foundations for its generous support of this fellowship. The work of this fellowship centers the work is centered on a subject that is often under-resourced, under-researched, and we greatly appreciate the Foundation's continued commitment to advancing the intersection of disability and reproductive justice. We also want to thank our stellar advisory board members, Robin Wilson Beatty, Laura Miller, Heather Watkins, Morenike Giwa Onaiwu, Aisha Elaine Lewis, and Ashira Greenberg, for their thoughtful guidance in selecting this year's fellow. I'm also deeply grateful to our stellar Lurie Institute team, Wendy Peveril-Conti, Amy Abushanab, Nicole Lomerson, and Maddie Crowley, for making today's event possible. For those who may be less familiar with the origins of this fellowship, it emerged right at the height of the COVID pandemic from a conversation at a Brandeis event honoring Rebecca Coakley as our Richmond Distinguished Fellow. During that event, Rebecca was asked how the university, how Brandeis University might reckon with the legacy of Justice Louis Brandeis, after whom Brandeis University, home to the Lurie Institute, is named, given his role in the Supreme Court decision, Buck v. Bell, which upheld the forced sterilization of disabled people. Rebecca's response was both direct and swift. She suggested creating a space to confront this history and to center the radical and often denied truth that disabled people have the right to sexuality, to parenthood, and to reproductive autonomy. And that suggestion years later led directly to the creation of this fellowship. Named in recognition of Carrie Buck and the enduring harms of Buck v. Bell, this initiative reflects our commitment as an institute and as a university to reckon with this history and to contribute to a more just future. It is the work of scholars and advocates like Evan that help move this work forward, challenging persistent misconceptions and advancing a more expansive understanding of disability, autonomy, and reproductive rights. It is now my pleasure to introduce our 2026 Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellow, Evan Sweeney. Evan is a trans disabled sexual health educator and the founder of Cripping Up Sex, a platform offering sex education resources for disabled people. Their work spans disability, sexuality, gender, and queer culture, and they have been leading workshops for over 15 years. Evan is also the author of Queers on Wheels and continues to offer both public education and individual consultations through their work. Joining Evan in conversation is Rebecca Coakley, Program Officer for the Ford Foundation's first ever U.S. Disability Rights Program. Rebecca's work focuses on strengthening the field, building diverse leadership, and advancing disability rights. Rebecca has held key policy roles across federal government and is a three-time presidential appointee and has played a pivotal role in elevating disability policy at the national level. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Evan, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Take it away, Evan.
Hello. I am so excited to be to be here. I use this letterboard, but for the SA, for the sake of time, I wrote out my SPEE. I wrote out my speech. So HEL, delete. So HERE. So here we go. DIS, disability. STU, studies. Is NEMER, emerging. FIE, field. In COLL, in colleges all over the COU, the country. Out of the hundreds of colleges in the United States, the Center on Human Policy, Law, and Disability Studies at Syracuse University lists only 23 active programs in disability studies. Disability studies is primarily a study of civil rights. Just looking at the course offering from UC Berkeley's Disability Studies program, offered as a concentration in the broader major of American Studies, reveals classes like Sociology of Illness and Medicine, Community Planning and Public Policy for Disability, and social, political, and ethical issues in health and medicine. These issues are important in the understanding of the lives of disabled people. However, disability studies programs and the scholars within them often overlook one very important topic: the sexuality of disabled people. This lack of discussion exists not only in the academic world, but also in society at large. In this talk, I will examine the historical reasons why the sexual lives of disabled people have been denied and the current cultural climate, which continues to feed into this aversion. Because the purpose of this talk is to start both the academic and social discussions about the sexuality of people with disabilities, it will be necessary to define, in a way useful to both discussions, three very crucial terms: disability, sexuality, and power. In this talk, I will focus primarily on physical disability because although there are overlapping issues, the issues pertaining to the sexual rights of people with cognitive disabilities are distinct enough to be considered in another arena. Because my own disability is a physical one, I feel I am on more logical and solid ground when I focus on the sexual rights of the physically disabled in this talk. I offer a more literal definition of disability from the American Heritage Medical Dictionary. Quote, a disadvantage or deficiency, especially a physical or mental impairment that prevents or restricts normal achievement. This is a problematic definition of disability. It assumes that people with disabilities cannot lead full lives. The disability prevents or restricts normal achievement, and normal is defined as, quote, relating to or characterized by average intelligence or development. Therefore, people with disabilities are prevented or restricted by their disabilities from achieving the same things that non-disabled people of average intelligence can achieve. By definition, the American Heritage Medical Dictionary seems to assume that people with disabilities cannot have, or will have a very difficult time having, even average intelligence.
Evan,
Sexuality is also a tricky term to define
I'm so
because
sorry to
every
interrupt.
person defines their sexuality in drastically different ways.
Evan, can I ask you to speak just a little bit slower so the ASL interpreters can keep up, so everybody can understand,
Yes.
understand what your important words. Thank you very much.
Yes. Sexuality is also a tricky term to define because every person defines their sexuality in drastically different ways. There are also many social and moral rules polluting the definition of sexuality. Merriam-Webster defines sexuality as the quality or state of being sexual. This is a great definition because it encompasses all sexual identities and acts. I chose the Merriam-Webster definition of sexuality because I feel that people with disabilities are so far out of the realm of sexuality that we need a concrete and basic definition to work from. Merriam-Webster provides a culturally accepted definition of power. That is the ability to act or produce an effect. Many people with disabilities lack the ability to act in the conventional way, to perform an action, or to bring someone or something to a result. In our culture, that inability translates into a lack of control over their lives. Parents, state or federal agencies, or other authority figures often make decisions for them. This lack of control extends to decisions about what to do or not to do with our bodies, leaving most disabled people feeling powerless. The agent of power, therefore, whether it is the state or a guardian or parent, steps up to make decisions for people with disabilities, including and especially in the realm of their sexuality. In this talk, I will argue that due to the still prevailing puritanical notions of sexuality in this country, due to the social stigma of disability, and due to the powerlessness of people with disabilities, which renders them second-class citizens in our culture, it is highly unlikely for either temporarily able-bodied people or disabled people to view people with disabilities as sexual beings. I will then propose that if disabled people can claim their own sexuality, it will be an empowering step towards claiming other rights to which they are entitled, rights that every American is granted under our Constitution. Freak shows of the 1900s are a great example of the dehumanizing of people with disabilities. People with visible disabilities, such as deformities and dwarfism, were literally put on display for people to gawk at. Rosemary Garland Thompson wrote, "The freak show consequently created a freak, or human curiosity, from an ordinary person who had a visible physical disability or an otherwise atypical body, by exaggerating the ostensible difference and the perceived distance between the viewer and the showpiece on the platform," unquote. These freak shows were very popular. People loved to interact and, quote, play with the freaks. Eli Clare explained, quote, "Freak shows populated the United States, and people flocked to the circus, the carnival, the storefront dime museum. They came to gawk at freaks, savages, and geeks. They came to be educated and entertained, titillated and repulsed. They came to have their ideas of normal and abnormal, superior and inferior, and their sense of self confirmed and strengthened," unquote. If people with disabilities did not join freak shows or could not stay at home with their families, they were usually institutionalized. These institutions provided no emotional or educational support. People who had primarily physical disabilities were lumped in with people who had, quote, severe mental disabilities. The care was horrible. People would usually lie in their beds all day with no one to help them get up. The basic humanity of the patient was assaulted in every way. Most institutions sterilized people with disabilities without giving them a voice. Until the 1970s, the routine sterilization of people with disabilities was commonplace. Freak shows and institutions were not all that different. Both treated people with disabilities as less than human. Both denied people with disabilities a voice, and both forced people with disabilities into their roles as either spectacle or, quote, something to take care of. Even today, the desire to keep people with disabilities out of sight or protect them from things that temporarily able-bodied people think are dangerous for them persists, and it is most often observed as a form of oppression known as infantilization, treating adults with disabilities like children, not allowing them to have control over where they live or how they live. Infantilization is usually done by parents, government agencies, or even the very disability organizations set up to assist the disabled. The artist Anne Abbott, who has cerebral palsy, had to deal with this attitude from her well-meaning parents. Quote, "When I told them that someday I wanted to be a wife and mother, they would say, 'That's nice, dear. I am sure that that will happen one day for you if you really wanted to.' I felt terribly confused in my teenage years. My mother told me to try not to become romantically interested in able-bodied boys," unquote. Saying, "That's nice, dear," and discouraging her from being interested in temporarily able-bodied boys refutes Abbott's adulthood and right to his sexuality. Likewise, when Abbott and her husband had a miscarriage, one of her relatives engaged in an inhuman act of infantilization. Quote, "After my miscarriage, one of my relatives made a rather glib suggestion to me that Rob and I should go out and buy a puppy instead of trying to get pregnant again," unquote. A person does not tell a temporarily able-bodied person to, quote, get a puppy instead of trying again after a failed pregnancy. Because Abbott is severely disabled, her relatives think because Abbott is, quote, severely disabled, her relatives think she does not need or should not have kids. Most people with disabilities experience infantilization, sometimes as serious as that experienced by Ann Abbott, in their daily lives. I am, for instance, often given kids' menus when I go out to eat. My aide has been asked on more than one occasion if I am his child, this despite a mere 3 years age difference between us. Very recently, my aide and I went out to deposit a check in my bank account. The normal procedure involves my aide parking my van on the street and walking a block or so to the ATM, depositing my check, and coming back. I choose not to get out of the van on these errands because it is a big hassle to get me and my chair out for a 2-minute errand. As my aide was walking back to the van one particular day, an old woman approached him, waving a lit cigarette as if conducting some unseen symphony. She looked my aide right in the eye and in very motherly tones stated, "I watched him." My aide paused, confused. He was unsure of any person that might need watching in the area. After a moment, however, my aide realized that the woman was referring to me, that she thought I was a boy, and that she apparently thought she was warding off some imminent threat by standing outside my van and smoking. This happens all the time. People think I need to be protected just because of my disability. A more subtle example of infantilization is the sex scene from the 1987 film Gabby, which is the true story of a woman with cerebral palsy who lives with one aide, Florencia, her entire life. Gabby's cerebral palsy is such that she can only communicate using her left foot on a letterboard. Gabby is, despite being limited in her physical range of movement, very smart and completes college, going on to a career in writing. Gabby helped write the only sex scene in the movie, so it is not just pulled from the imaginations of temporarily able-bodied people. And in it, Gabby and her boyfriend, Fernando, who has a more mild form of cerebral palsy, are making love without the assistance or indeed the approval of Florencia. Fernando slowly undresses her while she caresses him with her foot, and soon the pair are on the floor together, at which point the movie cuts to Gabby's mother arriving home. She sees Florencia sitting outside of Gabby's room, looking very distraught, and asks what's wrong. Florencia nods towards Gabby's door tearfully, and Gabby's mother walks over to the door, opens it just a crack, and sees Gabby and Fernando on the floor together. She shuts the door quietly, and now both she and Florencia are crying, clearly very upset by what is going on. Later in the film, Fernando's mother forbids him to ever see Gabby again. Gabby goes on to her education and career with Florencia as her aide, and it is worth noting that she never has sex again in her entire life. Now, at first, the sex scene appears to be a normal love scene between two people who desire each other. Gabby's mother does not run screaming into the room to break the pair up. She lets her daughter experience sex. However, the tone of the scene is exceedingly tragic, with Florencia and Gabby's mother practically mourning the fact that Gabby and Fernando are engaging in something that no one thinks they should. The music is very heavy at this point as well, as if the whole aesthetic effect is there to suggest, isn't it overwhelmingly tragic that these two people are engaging in such a dangerous act? This is infantilization because it portrays people with disabilities, no matter how smart they are, as people to be, quote, protected, in this case, from the tragedy of disabled sex. The infantilization in Gabby is made worse by the fact that it is supposed to be the true and triumphant story of a person with a disability overcoming all obstacles to achieve the same things that everyone dreams of achieving, with the glaringly obvious exception of a fulfilling sex life. Infantilization is not merely a cultural phenomenon, but also an institutional one. Many organizations that ostensibly exist to help people with disabilities engage in systemic infantilization. Even when one tries to educate these organizations, and by extension, people with disabilities, about the sexual needs of the people they serve, the organization shuts down the would-be educator. When I called to ask several organizations if they had information about disability and sexuality, the responses I received ranged from being politely negative to downright rude. They always have been scared and discouraging about sex, even heterosexual sex. I have had experiences where organizations have hung up on me for asking the simple question, do you have information pertaining to sex and disability? Disability organizations perceive sex as a scary thing and one to protect people with disabilities from. Having these experiences not only made me feel alienated, but it also made me think of other people who might be calling and asking these same questions. I was honored at a conference for people with disabilities in 2005. I had to give a speech about nonverbal communication. My speech was supposed to explain why I choose to communicate the way I do. In explaining how I communicate, I mentioned that my method of communication is particularly good when I am in bed with someone. Knowing that this would raise a few eyebrows, I went on to explain that people with disabilities are sexual, just like temporarily able-bodied people, and that we need to be able to communicate that. I used words like sex and queer and masturbate. During my speech, everyone was silent. After my speech, nobody clapped, and some representatives from the Dynavox Corporation, which makes augmentative communication devices and is run by conservative Christians, called everyone who attended the conference to apologize for my speech. Apparently, just saying the word sex was too much for the concerned folks at Dynavox. A Berkeley performance artist, whom I'll call Bob. People interviewed for this speech have been given fake names to protect their anonymity and privacy, received similar sentiments from the disabled community. His art is usually performed in the nude and has very sexual overtones. The disabled community is uncomfortable with his art because, according to Bob, the disabled movement has been very serious, very PC, trying to fit in. I drive that kind of person up the wall. I am dangerous. Don't play by the rules. Poke at their pictures. In the late 80s, a wheelchair dancer was hired by Center for Independent Living in Berkeley to produce a show on art, eroticism, and disability. He wanted me in it, but he was told in clear terms I was blacklisted. So I had him do a nude dance in one of my performances, unquote. Unlike Bob and a handful of others, most people with disabilities do not believe that they can be sexual. Their sexuality is bred out of them by sex education classes and social views of disability. Clearly, by now, one can see that people with disabilities have the same sexual urges as temporarily able-bodied people. As Ann Abbott eloquently puts it in the documentary Cerebral Palsy and Sex from 2005, quote, yes, I think about sex almost all the time, like 99% of the time. I like sex mostly because it feels wonderful and because of the closeness you get. I mean, masturbation feels wonderful too, but you don't get the closeness, unquote. She further explains why. Quote, I think I'm more interested in sex because society doesn't want me to have it, unquote. However, not many people with disabilities are as self-aware as Ann Abbott. One 40-year-old woman at a national cerebral palsy conference to which I was invited to give a workshop and speech about cerebral palsy and sexuality expressed her appreciation for my workshop because until my workshop, she had never talked about sex. One might be surprised at her comment given her age, but as a member of the disability community, I understood her sentiment. It also reinforced how sheltered people with disabilities are about sex and their own sexualities, and the need for my work and the work of only a handful of others, which examines closely the relationship of sex and disability. Rachel, a 35-year-old Indian woman with cerebral palsy and 2 PhDs, believes that sexual activity is beyond her grasp because, quote, the disability makes it mostly as impossible. She believes, unquote, she believes that the only way for her to have a sexual relationship is to find a partner who is, quote, cool and understanding, unquote. It might appear at first that everyone wants someone who is cool and understanding, but Rachel is not aware that someone could find her sexually attractive. Part of the problem for people like Rachel is a distinct and disturbing lack of vocabulary to discuss, in a shame-free way, their sexuality. Historically, the discussion of sex in America has been shrouded in shame and mystery even as we became developed and civilized in other ways. Even Alfred Kinsey's attempt to reasonably lift the veil of mystery from sex and sexuality was rewarded with condemnation and scorn by some of his academic peers, supposedly scientists themselves. It is clear, then, that the Puritan attitude toward sex permeates all of our sexual expression in this country. Whether reacting to it as those who participated in the sexual revolution or trying to reinstate it as those who support the true love revolution, the Puritan mentality, one where sex is not discussed openly and honestly, but is swept under the rug to be navigated only by heterosexual couples on their wedding night for purposes of procreation, has left its stamp on the sexual consciousness of America. Compounded by the abysmal attitudes toward and treatment of people with disabilities in this country, it is not surprising that there has not been adequate or realistic discussion of the sexual rights of people with disabilities. One might be inclined to ask, why are disabled people sheltered from sex? That is a hard question to answer because few people acknowledge people with disabilities having any positive sexual experiences. Moreover, if we do speak openly and positively about sex and/or sexual pleasure, we are silenced or blacklisted, as Bob was, from the very organizations that supposedly exist to help us. Therefore, the attitude is, if it doesn't exist, why talk about it? Another possible explanation is that temporarily able-bodied people believe that people with disabilities need to be protected or they will be taken advantage of, instead of educating people with disabilities on what is healthy sex and what is not. Sex education for people with disabilities is scare tactics. There is just enough knowledge provided to know when something really bad is happening to you, with no honest acknowledgement that sex can be, and is, wonderful for many people, disabled or not. One method of remedying this situation is for people with disabilities to start talking, even if we get silenced. The sexual rights of people with disabilities are human rights, and as such, alliances can be made with temporarily able-bodied human rights groups. If the voices grow loud enough and diverse enough, they cannot be silenced. Organizations, government agencies, and parents would have to listen. There would be no way to ignore it. People with disabilities claiming their sexual rights loudly, proudly, and with no shame would be a true sexual revolution, and thus, further revolution can be possible. To sustain this necessary sexual revolution, which requires empowering new resources, and to directly combat the critical lack of good, joyful, and most importantly, sex-positive information that has long shrouded disabled sexuality in shame, I am absolutely thrilled and deeply honored to announce the creation of a groundbreaking new initiative, the Access Archives. The Access Archives will manifest as a series of fun, highly engaging, and relatively short video segments designed to tackle prevalent issues and explore the exciting intersection of sex and disability, always centered on a powerful, authentic, first-person perspective. We have already lined up a truly remarkable and diverse range of initial contributors, including the wonderful Bethany Stevens, and we are in the process of confirming several other phenomenal voices to ensure a comprehensive and rich archive of experience. I consciously chose this fun, concise, and highly digestible video style for a very specific, strategic reason. The vast majority of existing video content available on platforms like YouTube that discusses sex and disability tends to be excessively long, often dense, and predominantly follows the rigid, problem-focused medical model of disability. This approach, while sometimes necessary, often frames disability as a deficit to be corrected rather than a form of human variation. By making the Access Archives not only informative but genuinely fun, accessible, and easily digestible, we achieve two major interconnected goals. 1. Appealing to the disabled community. The format immediately resonates with other disabled folks, providing the positive, relatable, and affirming content that has been sorely missing from the current media landscape. It shifts the narrative from clinical discussion to lived, shared, and empowering experiences. 2. Educating the non-disabled public. This accessible format makes the crucial information easily consumable for non-disabled people as well. The second point is monumental. The Access Archives will be an incredibly powerful tool that will, we hope, effectively bust some of the most persistent and damaging myths, stereotypes, and biases that non-disabled people hold about sex and disability. By presenting sex-positive stories from the source, we can dismantle the misconception that disabled people are inherently asexual or incapable of fulfilling sexual lives, thereby fostering a more inclusive and informed societal perspective. In conclusion, the historical and cultural oppression of disabled people, from the dehumanization of freak shows to the systemic infantilization of modern institutions, has long sought to erase their sexual agency. Yet it is imperative to recognize that sexual rights are fundamental human rights. By dismantling these archaic stigmas through the Access Archives, we can fuel a necessary sexual revolution. By prioritizing positive, first-person narratives that celebrate disability as a natural form of human variation, we move toward a future where every individual is empowered to claim their own sexuality loudly, proudly, and without shame.
Evan, thank you so much for your remarks. I'm now going to invite Rebecca Coakley up for a bit of a discussion. And go ahead and take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Coakley. I'm a white woman with red hair and a glorious abundance of freckles. I'm wearing a black blazer and a green dress. This conversation has been so incredibly powerful, Evan, and I think I would start off by asking you, what does this award mean to you? And why does it matter to you to be a Carrie Buck Fellow?
FIRST. First, I am so honored to receive this AW award. This recognition serves as a powerful validation that my work surrounding the intersection of sex and disability truly matters, is deeply important, and is still so desperately needed in our current climate. While I am grateful, I also recognize the bittersweet nature of this moment. I wish we lived in a world where such an award wasn't necessary, because that would mean society had finally become enlightened to the nuances of sexual agency for disabled people. However, this award provides the previous fellows and me a vital platform to amplify our voices and share our work with a much broader audience, sparking conversations that can lead to genuine cultural shift.
Thank you so much. You know, for so long, sexual education and exploration by disabled people has been seen as deviant behavior. It's even been criminalized. People have been sterilized, institutionalized, physically and chemically restrained for this. Why do you think the idea of sexual pleasure is so scary for people without disabilities?
For so LONG, for so long. SE, sex. ED, education. And EXPL, exploration. By DISA, by disabled. PEO, people. Has been UNFAI unfairly FRAME framed as the DEVIA, deviant behavior. Historically, this fear has manifested in horrific ways. Our community has faced forced sterilization, institutionalization, and both physical and chemical restraint just for expressing natural human desires. I believe the idea of disabled pleasure is scary to non-disabled people because it challenges the medicalized view of our bodies as objects to be, quote, fixed or cared for, rather than subjects with desire and autonomy. When we claim pleasure, we reclaim our humanity, and that disrupts the comfortable, paternalistic narratives society often relies on to keep us categorized and controlled.
That piece around keeping us categorized and controlled, I think, hits the nail on the head so eloquently. And I think for so many of us, it leads to just such a complete feeling of being isolated and disconnected from ourselves and our community. In your interview in Bold Journey, you talked about being the only one like you in the room. And I know that's something I feel pretty regularly. And I know it's shared with probably at least 80% of the people on our Zoom call this afternoon. Can you talk about the ways that experience can be weaponized to your advantage, being the only person in the room like you?
I have been the only PE person like me in the R, O, in the room. S, I, since I was a K, I, D, since I was a kid. My mom fought tirelessly for me to be mainstreamed starting in kindergarten. So this feeling of being an outlier is not new to me. It's a space where I have learned to navigate with confidence. I like to use that visibility to force education on people simply through my presence and my voice. Because many people have never encountered someone with my specific lived experience, they lack a pre-written script for how to interact with me. I weaponize this to my advantage because they cannot rely on tired tropes or say, oh, I already know all about you. It forces them to actually listen and learn from the source, allowing me to set the terms of the engagement and redefine their expectations in real time.
That's what an incredible answer. And I think you've probably given people in the room a lot to think about when they look in rooms and find themselves being the only person like them. How can you use your personal power to force the conversation when I think so many times the terms of the conversation are set up to keep us disconnected from power? I want to go to one of the questions that was submitted at the time of registration, which is what can be done to balance an individual's right to pleasure while protecting oneself from exploitation? And then after that question, we'll turn this back over to Nicole, and she will help moderate the Q&A from the audience.
BAL, balancing. The right to PLEA, to pleasure, with PERS, personal, SAF, safety, is about EMPOW, empowerment, THR, through INTUIT, intuition, and COMMU, community. I think keeping a few key practical tips in mind is the best way to navigate this. First, practice reading between the lines in digital communication. Ask yourself, is this person genuinely trying to get to know me as a whole human being? Or are they fixated on my disability in a way that feels fetishistic or dehumanizing? Second, never underestimate the power of a vibe check from your community. Getting your friends' honest opinions on a potential partner is invaluable because they can often spot red flags that we might overlook in the heat of a new crush. Ultimately, your gut feeling is your most important tool. If something feels off, it usually is.
Great. Now we're going to turn it back over to Nicole at the Lurie Institute.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Evan. We have questions in the Q&A. We are probably not going to be able to get to all of them, but we will try to get it through as many as we can. Our first one, Evan, says, thank you for the talk. I wonder if you have any thoughts or insights on kink in the context of sex and disability, both as a mode of sexual interaction and with regard to kink communities and relationships with disability communities.
K-I-N, kink, can be so helpful. It can get, it can give D-I-S-A, disabled people, the P-O, power, they, L-A-C, hey, the power they lack in their E-V-E, every day lives. Also, it can help with P-A-I. It can help with pain. R-A. Delete. R-E-L. It can help with pain relief. O-B. Obviously. P-R-A-C-T-I-C. Practicing. Good. K-I-N-K. Good kink. E-D-I. Good kink etiquette is K-E, is key. But it can be so helpful.
Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. We have another question here from someone who I believe is a service provider. My organization provides information and referrals to families of young people with disabilities and transition age youth. My question is, when and where should we, meaning my organization, be raising awareness? We know it is important, and we are hoping you can give us information on best practices. Looking forward to the archive.
I would say, do it in A-G-E, in an age appropriate way. A-S-A, ASAP.
Mm-hmm.
Like for E-L-E, for elementary school kids, you can talk about what H-A-V, what having a C-R, a crush is. And for H-I, for high schoolers, you can talk about D-A, about dating. And G-E-N-D-E, and gender.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to shorten this one a little bit with apologies to our person who asked the question just for time. do you see sexual ableism pop up in relationships between temporarily able-bodied parents and their adult children with disabilities?
Yes. P-A-R, parents. O-F-T-E, often want to. K-E-E, often want to keep us. S-A-F-E, often want to keep us safe. That's their J-O-B. That's their job. But it can be L-E-E. It can bleed into A-D-U-L. It can bleed into adulthood. When we don't need that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That is a wonderful insight. And I'm going to now toss it back to Monica Mitra to present our 2026 Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellowship Award.
Hi, everyone. Evan, thank you so much for a really engaging, for a thought-provoking talk. Your work challenges assumptions and expands how we think about disability and sexuality and rights. And while the issues that you raise are deeply serious and extremely important, I found the moments of humor you woven through your stories made them all the more memorable and powerful. And Rebecca and Evan, thank you for the rich conversation. We're very grateful for the perspectives that you both have shared. Thank you, everyone, for joining, for asking questions, for participating. We appreciate your time and your commitment to these important conversations.
And, I'm sorry, Monica, go ahead.
I just wanted to present with my great pleasure to formally recognize Evan as our 2026 Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellow and to present you with this year's virtual Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellowship plaque. We are really, really honored to celebrate your contributions and welcome you into this fellowship community. So everyone, thank you, and please join me in congratulating Evan. And wish everyone a great day. So Evan, congratulations and thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for attending. And when you leave the webinar, you'll see a link to our post-webinar feedback survey. And we'd really appreciate if you could fill it out and also follow us on social media. Thanks so much and have a great day.